Hello, you guys. Today is part 2 of the life of David. I'm sorry for the long wait of a couple of days, but here it is tonight. In part 1, we saw David as a shepherd, and David was the shepherd that God chose. David was overlooked by his family, left in the field, and considered least likely to become king, but God looked beyond the outward appearance and saw David's heart. Now in part 2, David steps out of the pasture and into the battlefield. This is the account most people know David for. And it is the account of David and Goliath. But this lesson is more than a young man defeating a giant. It is about faith overcoming fear. It is about one person trusting God when everyone else is afraid. It is about seeing a battle from God's point of view instead of man's point of view. The title of this lesson is Faith Over Fear. Our key verse is 1 Samuel 17 and verse 47. And all this assembly shall know that the Lord saveth not with a sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. The victory, guess what? The victory did not belong to David because David was strong. The victory belonged to David because David trusted in a strong God. The first point of this lesson is Israel was controlled by fear. If you go to 1 Samuel 17, verse 1 through 3, it says, Now the Philistines gathered together their armies to battle, and were gathered together at Shunem, which belongeth to Judah, and pitched between Shunem and Absalom and Ephesiandam. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together and pitched by the valley of Elam, and set the battle in array against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on a mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side, and there was a valley between them. So, the Philistines and the Israelites stood on opposite sides of the valley. Both armies were prepared for battle. But before the armies fought, the Philistines sent out a champion. If you go to verse 4, it says, And there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines, named Goliath of Gath, whom height was 6 cubits and a span. Goliath was a giant man. He was experienced in warfare. He was heavily armed. Everything about him was designed to intimidate. And that's what he did to Israel. He intimidated Israel. The Bible continued describing his armor, his helmet, his spear, and his shield. Goliath represents everything Israel feared. He was bigger than they was. He was stronger. He was more experienced. He appeared unbeatable. For 40 days, Goliath came out and challenged Israel. For 40 days. That's what Goliath did. If we go to verse 8 through 10 of 1 Samuel 17, it says, And he stood and cried unto the armies of Israel, and said unto them, Why are ye come out to set your battle in array. Am not I a Philistine, and ye servants to Saul? Choose you a man for you. Choose you a man for you, and let him come down to me. If he's able to fight with me and to kill me, then will we be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then shall ye be our servants and serve us. And the Philistine said, I defy the armies of Israel. This day give me a man, that we may fight together. Goliath wasn't only challenging Israel, he was mocking Israel's God. He was trying to convince them that the battle depended entirely upon human strength. That is how fear works. Fear makes us forget God. Fear makes us the enemy look bigger than what he really is. Fear makes the problem appear greater than the power of God. Verse 11, it says, When Saul and all Israel heard those words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Notice that Saul was afraid. Saul was a king, right? Saul was the tallest man in Israel. If anybody appeared qualified to fight Goliath, it was Saul. But outwardly, size does not create inward courage. You can be as big as you want and still be a cow. Still be afraid. Saul had the height, but David had the faith. Israel was not defeated on the battlefield yet, but they was already defeated in their minds. Fear had paralyzed them, in other words. Point 2, David was faithful before he was famous. While the armies were gathered in the battle, David was still serving his father. For Samuel 15, or 1 Samuel 17 verse 15, it says, But David went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. David was already been anointed to become king. Yet he returned to the sheep. He did not say, I am too important for this now. Oh, he did not say, oh, I have been appointed, someone else can take care of the flock. No, he did not. He remained faithful. That's an important lesson right there. Faithfulness should not be dependent upon whether people are watching or not. David did not know that one ordinary day would become the day that would change his life. He simply obeyed his father. 1 Samuel 17, verse 17 through 18 says, And Jesse said unto David, his son, Take now for thy brethren an asam of this parched corn and these 10 loaves, and run to the camp to thy brethren, and carry these 10 cheeses unto the captain of their thousands, and look how they brethren fail, and take their pledge. David was sent not to fight a giant, but to deliver food. He was sent on a simple errand. That's all he was. He didn't get sent to go fight Goliath. He did not. While David was doing something ordinary, God was leading him into something extraordinary. Many great opportunities becomes with simple obedience. David reacted. David reached the battlefield because he obeyed his father. Sometimes people want want God to show them a great purpose, while they are knowing the small responsibilities already that's in front of them. Be faithful in the little things, y'all. You never know what doors God may open for simple obedience. Because the third point is, David heard the same giant, but differently. When David reached the camp, Goliath came out again. If you go to 23 and 24 of chapter 17, it says, "And as he talked with them, behold, there came up the champion of the Philistines of Gath, Goliath by name, out of the armies of the Philistines, and spake according to the same words, and David heard them." And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him, and were so afraid. Everybody heard the same words, everybody saw the same giant, but David responded differently. Israel saw a warrior who could not be defeated, but David saw an enemy who defiled the living God. If you go to verse 26, this is David's response right here. "And David spake to the man that stood by him, saying, What shall be done to the man that killeth this Philistine, and taketh away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defile the armies of the living God?" That question David asked reveals his faith. He did not say, "Who can possibly defeat this man?" No. He said, in fact, "Who does this man think he is to defile the armies of the living God?" That David understood something that Israel forgot right there. Israel was not just any other army. They belonged to the living God. Goliath was not merely fighting men. Goliath was fighting the living God as well. Yes, he was standing against God's people and insulting God's name. David saw the battle spiritually, not only physically, but he saw it spiritually. Faith, guess what? Faith does not deny the size of the problem, but faith compares the size of the problem to the greatness of God. Yes, you may have a problem today. Yes, it may look like a giant that you cannot defeat on your own. Because guess what? You cannot defeat it on your own. You can only defeat it with the help of the living God. Because yes, David knew Goliath was large, but David knew God was greater. The next point is David faced encouragement from his own brothers. Not everyone appreciated David's courage. David was upset, but his older brother became angry at him. We go to verse 28 of the same chapter we've been in. "And Abram, his eldest brother, heard when he spake unto the men, and anger was kindled against David. And he said, Why camest thou down hither? And with whom hast thou left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know thy pride and naughtiness of thine heart. For thou art come down with thy mightiness, see the battle." Abram accused David of pride. He belittled David's responsibility. He said, those few little sheeps. Those few little sheep. But those few sheep was part of God's preparation for David. Abel misunderstood David's motive. He accused David for only coming to watch the battle. But David had come because his father sent him. Sometimes when you try to do the right thing, people will misunderstand you. Sometimes the strongest criticism will come from sometimes the strongest criticism doesn't come from people you don't like, doesn't come from your enemies. But the strongest criticism comes from people that is close to you. Abram had already been rejected by God in the previous chapter. God said he wasn't the king. Now he was attacking the one that God chose. Yes, David could become angry. Yeah, he could. But David answered wisely. In verse 29, he said, and David said, what have I done? Is there not a cause? What have I now done? Is there not a cause? That is one of the greatest questions in this passage. Is there not a cause? David understood that something was greater, was at stake than his personal feelings. God's name was mocked. People was afraid. The enemy was gaining ground. There was a cause worth fighting for. And we also has a cause today. Because the gospel is still worth preaching today. Souls are still worth reaching. The truth is still worth defending. The next generation. Yes, it may seem this generation is gone, but this next generation is still worth teaching. The work of God is still worth doing. Christian, don't forget that. Don't allow criticism to distract you from the cause. David turned away from Abram and kept moving forward. Because David remembered past victories. Eventually David was brought before Saul. Saul immediately doubted him. In verse 33 of chapter 17 it says, and Saul said to David, thou art not able to go against the Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth, and he was a man of war from his youth. Saul looked at David's age. He looked at Goliath's experience. But it's kind of ironic because he said David is disqualified because he was young. But he gave Goliath credibility because he's been fighting wars since he was young. So that's kind of ironic though. Because yes, Goliath had experience. From a human viewpoint, yes, Saul was correct. David was not able in his own strength, but David did not plan to fight with his own strength. David began to fight to tell Saul what God already done. If you go to verse 34 through 37, this is the part that David explained to Saul. Saying, David said unto Saul, thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock, and I went out after him and smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by the beard, and smote him, and slew him. The servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this circumcised Philistine shall be one as one of them, seeing he hath defiled the armies of the living God. David said evermore, the Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said unto David, go, and the Lord be with thee. Because guess what? David remembered the lion. David remembered the bear because he remembered how God delivered him before. Past victories will strengthen. His past victories strengthen his present faith. Because guess what? David did not say, I was strong enough to defeat the lion and the bear. He said, the Lord that delivered me. David gave God the credit. He didn't take the credit. He understood that the same God who helped him in the pasture could help him in the valley. When you face a new battle, remember what God has already done. Remember that the prayer he has answered. Remember the doors that he opened. Remember the times he protected you. Remember the times he provided for you. Remember the times he carried you through difficulties. Because the God who is faithful is still faithful today. Because guess what? David knew it was his own strength. He refused to fight in someone else's armor. Because guess what? Saul placed his armor upon David, but he refused it. We go to verse 38 and verse 39. It says, and Saul armed David with his armor, and he put a helmet of brass upon his head, and also armed him with a coat of mail. And David grind his sword upon his armor, and he assembled to go, for he had not proved them. And David said unto Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them. And David put them off him. Saul tried to turn David into a smaller Saul, but David could not fight Goliath to pretending to be somebody else. David had not proved Saul's armor. He took it off. That's a really important application right there. God does not need you to be somebody else before he can use you. Yes, you can learn from others. Yes, you can respect others. Yes, you can receive advice from others. But you must walk with God personally. Because just like how David had a sling, he had a staff, and he had 5 smooth stones. Yes, those things may not look impressive, but those weapons, those tools, he already proved and he knew he could use them. God often will use the simple things that God often used simple things that have been surrendered to him. Guess what? Moses had a rod. Samson had a jawbone of an ass. A widow had a little oil. A lad had 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And David had a sling and 5 stones. The power was never in the object. The power was in God. And after he had his weapons, his proven weapons, he didn't walk to the battle, he ran towards the battle. David approached Goliath. When Goliath saw him, he was offended. Goliath was like, "What?" If you go to verse 42 and 44 through 44, it says, "And when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth and ruddy and fair constance. And the Philistine said unto David, Am I a dog that thou comest to me with stripes? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, Come to me, and I will give thy flesh unto the fowls of the airs and the beasts of the fields. Goliath trusted his size. Goliath trusted in his armor, and he trusted in his experience. But David, in other terms, David trusted not in himself, but trusted in the Lord, the living God. First, if we go to 45 and 47 through 47, it says, Then said David to the Philistine, Thou comest to me with a sword and a spear, and with a shield. But I come with thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defiled. This day will the Lord deliver thee into my hand, and I will smite thee, and take thy head from thee. And I will give the carcass of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air, and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And all this assembly shall know that the Lord saveth not with a sword and a spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. David did not enter the battle to prove that he was great. He entered the battle to prove that God was great. His purpose was that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. David wanted God to receive the glory. Then the Bible says something very powerful in verse 48. And it came to pass when the Philistine arose and came and drew the night to meet David, that David hastened, ran towards the armies to meet the Philistine. David ran toward the battle. The entire army was running away, but David ran forward. Faith does not always remove that battle, but sometimes faith gives us the courage to run towards the battle. David did not wait until he felt no pressure. He acted upon what he believed about God. Because guess what? He believed that God will give victory, because God did give victory. And you go to verse 49 to 50, it says, And David put his hand in his bag and took the strength of his stone and slang it and smote the Philistine in the forehead, that the stone sank into the forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with the sling and with the stone, and smote the Philistine through him but there was no sword in the hand of David. One stone brought down the giant. The victory was immediate. The giant who terrified Israel for 40 days fell before a shepherd's boy. But the real lesson here is not that David was a good shot. The lesson is that God gave the victory. David's skill mattered. His preparation mattered. His courage mattered. But none of these things replaced the power of God. David used what he had, but he trusted God for the results. After Goliath fell, the Israelites found courage and pursued the Philistines. One person's faith encouraged an entire army. Your faith can affect other people. When you stand for God, others will find courage to stand. When you trust God, others may begin to trust Him. When you step forward, many will follow after you. So here's some lessons from David and Goliath, from this part of the story. Giants grow when we focus on them. Israel listened to Goliath for 40 days. The longer they listened, the more they're afraid. They became fear grow when we repeatedly focus on the problems. Faith grows when we focus. Faith will grow when we focus upon God's promises. Be careful what fills your minds. Don't allow the voice of fear become louder than the word of God. Then secondly, faith remembers God's past faithfulness. David remembered the lion and the bear. When fear says, what will happen now? Faith says, look at what God has already done. And also, the third lesson you can get from the story is faith is not reckless. David was prepared. He had used that sling before. He proven that stuff. He had protected the sheep before. He was not careless. He trusted God while he using the ability God already helped him develop. Faith does not mean refusing wisdom. Faith means obeying God despite fear. Because the fourth lesson is the battle belongs to the Lord. Because some battles are too great for us. But we must remember the battle is the Lord's. We still have to stand. We still have to obey. We still have to take that step. But the victory comes from God. Because victory should bring glory to God, not yourself. David wanted all the earth to know that there was a God. The purpose of the victory was not to make himself famous. The purpose was to make God known. What giants are you facing? I had a good friend who preached a message about this, about David and Goliath. The giants you are facing. Maybe it's fear. Maybe it's discouragement. Maybe it's temptation. Maybe it's bitterness. Maybe it's a difficult decision. Maybe it is an opportunity to witness to someone. Maybe it's a pressure from other people. Maybe it's an area you feel unqualified. Your giant may not look like Goliath, but it may still stand before you and say, you cannot win. You're too weak. You're too young. You failed before. You do not have enough ability. You should give up. You should not go. You should not talk to that person. You should not go to the mission field. You should not preach. Do not answer the giant with your own strength, but answer with God's promises. Philippians 4:13 says, I can do all things through Christ, which strengthens me. Romans 8:31 says, what shall we then say to these things? If God be for us, who can be against us. 1 John 4:4 says, ye are God's little children and have overcome them, because greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. So in conclusion, David was not the largest man in the valley. He was not the most experienced warrior. He did not have the best armor. He did not have the strongest weapon, but he did know God. Israel saw Goliath and said, he's too big to defeat. David saw Goliath and understood, he's too small. He is too small to defeat God. That's the difference that faith makes. Faith does not pretend giants are not there, but faith sees the giants and still trust God. Fear asks, what if I fall? But faith asks, what if God gives victory? Fear says, I cannot do this, but faith says the battle is the Lord's. Fear runs away, but faith runs towards the battle. So ask yourself this, what fear has been controlling me? What have I been focusing more on the size of the problem than the greatness of my God? Am I allowing criticism to distract me from the cause? Am I remembering what God had already done? Am I depending upon my own strength, or am I trusting in the Lord? Because David's victory began before he ever picked up the stone. It began in his heart. He had already decided that God was greater than Goliath. Today, place your faith in God. Stop listening to the voice of fear and remember God's faithfulness. Stand upon his promises. Step forward in obedience and never forget the battle is the Lord's. Thank you guys for watching part 2, Faith over Fear. The Life of David, part 2, Faith over Fear. Thank you guys.